Hello again, this is Joe Rankin from Bettendorf High School. We're going to be going through the middle school speech and debate materials that I've kind of thrown together for my own program, and hopefully that'll be of help to you. And so this session, I'm going to be covering the overview of events that I did for the interpretation events that we're offering through the Bettendorf Middle School program, and we'll get to it. So here we go. And yeah, this is what I went through on that first day with students. My intent of this particular PowerPoint was to make sure that I had material that I could give to high school students or my assistant coach to go through things, because I wasn't quite certain if I would be doing this training or if they would. And so I was trying to make something that would be a good first day kind of material the first week. And so here we go. In terms of the first thing I usually do is just go over the calendar. And so just to make sure that they know where we're going and how we're going through things, I just go through and make sure that they have that in front of them each week, so that way they know what we'll be doing that week. This particular week, we are going to go over the event overview and the script process, and I do find that Interp, at least for me as a coach, is probably one of my weaker elements, and so I wanted to make sure that I had something to start off from and to give them an idea of where we would like them to go from there. And so just keeping that calendar in mind, I put that on each week's slide, or any kind of time I present material to them, so they know what we're going for. The first thing I wanted to go over them, because I wasn't certain if these would be new people. We did have a parent and student meeting the week prior. In this case, we had spring break in between though, and I wasn't certain if more people would be invited or not, so I wanted to make sure that I covered the basics. And so in this particular PowerPoint slide, I just go over dramatic interpretation, duo interpretation, and humorous interpretation, the three events that I decided to focus on. Program oral interpretation is just a little bit too different for me to really grasp and to think I could handle that kind of event in this kind of time frame. And so I decided to cut that from our program, at least for this particular year. And from there, I'm not going to go through this too much, because hopefully as coaches you know what these events are, but if not, I do know that the National Speech and Debate Association, all of this information is straight from their website. I try to use that same terminology, so that way if parents or students looked things up, it would be the same. And so in terms of this, I just went over the basics: one-person event, 10-minute performance, published piece, and the different kind of performance elements that come about that. One of the biggest things that I do stress for dramatic interpretation is the published piece element, because it has changed quite a bit over the years. And I also try to, with the parents at the first meeting, to just kind of make sure that we're talking about what kind of content that this can become and how that has changed over the years. And so when I was looking for some examples of these things, I was trying to make sure that I was doing something that was appropriate to the middle school level. It was an issue that I was concerned about, and still am, and we'll see how this all plays out. Then there's humorous interpretation. Again, just the bare bone basics there, and I do note that how it isn't really a difference in technique or focus. It's more of just a difference in humorous versus dramatic, and so making sure that they understand what that means, and how humorous will be a little bit more with multiple characters, whereas dramatic tends to be a little bit less on that front, but more involved on the emotional draininess. And then there's duo interpretation as well, which goes through and talks about that. The hardest part on this one that I found is just that idea of the no direct eye contact with partner and no physical contact with partner, which is written in the rule books, but when you watch final rounds, or if you see performances from across the country, you'll know that that line has been blurred far more than it has in the past. And so it is kind of interesting to see what that means, and to show them a piece and to say like how that portrayal goes about, but it is a little bit different. In terms of my own talking through this points, the one thing I did say to all of them, because at this point in the year when we're just starting off, some of these kids don't know if they want to do dramatic or humorous or with a partner. And so I just wanted to stress the different things that are the exact same in all three of these events, in terms of developing characters, telling a story, conveying emotion, etc. And just to plant some seeds for future things like utilizing blocking. And then I do go over the story structure, or at least the structure of an interpretation event a little bit, with the teaser, introduction, and scene. And that's what I emphasize there for the first day before I go into what I think is the most important element, is just kind of showing things. Now this isn't really showing up right now on the screen. Oh, there it is. I do know that when I downloaded this from my Google slide presentation into a PowerPoint, that the link didn't quite work the same way. It does appear to be working here. One of the things that I was concerned about for dramatic interpretation, I already mentioned a little bit earlier, was the fact that the content can be not middle school appropriate. And so I did find a YouTube video of a national final round contestant, And I did put a warning here that there is some language, but minor, just so that way I could talk to them about that. And I did watch the entire DI. It's the only one I 100% watched before I just found a YouTube link with a final round and knew it was okay. But I wanted to make sure that the content was appropriate for the age group. And what I did in this particular instance, or at least what I had the assistant coach or the high schooler who ended up running this particular meeting, was I asked them to have these questions ready to go so that way they could do some analysis of this. But I made sure that it was all 3 people of Interp right now. People who may have already thought dramatic or humorous or duo, but I wanted them to watch one of each, and so that's what I was doing here for that first week's meetings, is that I wanted them to see what characterizations were used, what stood out in terms of movement, what was the story, how did it develop, how did the introduction help, why do you think this performance won? And they're not always the winner of the entire tournament, but there are people who made it to the final round at nationals, so they're going to be pretty good regardless. And it's a good way of showing them exactly where you want them to end at. It can be a bit overwhelming, so I do think it's something to stress that this is not where they're going to start from. And these are high schoolers who could have done this for 3-4 years, or potentially even more if they started in the middle school. So I don't want to emphasize that level, but I do want to see here's the end product and what it should be. Then in terms of humorous interpretation, same thing. This one is the Lorax. I do remember that one. And so it was interesting to show them a children's book or something, so that way they can see the multiple characters, they can see the action, and it is good to, just to compare and contrast from the dramatic interpretation. But again, the same kind of questions are meant to be asked. And I think these are good to show them right in the beginning, where you can show them an emphasis on drama, and then you can show them an emphasis on humorous interpretation, compare and contrast, see what kind of people, these are that you're working with, and to see what kind of path works best for them. Or if they wanted to, they could also do duo interpretation. And this one does have some of that. I mean, even from the screenshot right there, you can see that they're not touching, but they are right over the shoulder, and they are looking. There's a lot of variables in the rule book. And so this is a opportunity to talk about that and how that can change. And you can go through that after you watch the presentation. But in terms of this, it is good to ask that, how is this different from DI and HI? What are the similarities? How does that partner element work? But again, just trying to make sure that they're not overwhelmed either, because this is by far a highly developed end product from high school students who have done this for quite a while, at the very least this 1 year, but potentially 4. And so just to let them know that that kind of emphasis is going to be what you're going for. But it's the journey, not the destination. And then finally, what I do go through with them is some of the script lists, which the NSDA, if you remember, you do have available to you. And you can download the script list from 2025. And I'll show it here on the screen in just a second. But I have links to that, which I've shared on our Canvas page that I made for the team. I did add all of them to that at this point, or at least that's the goal by the next week, so that way they can all have access to it. And then I also have a script database that we have purchased and such. I do find that the existing script database kind of stuff is kind of difficult, if you go through a different kind of a company or something, because sometimes those things aren't meant for NSDA 10-minute performances. They're sometimes shorter, or they're just not as developed, or they're developed in a way that doesn't make as much sense. And so I do caution there. But I do go through any book, story, etc., especially if a kid does have something that they do care a great deal about. I do caution, at least in this particular model that I'm working with, is that I typically have about 7 total weeks. I'm not as confident in my ability to help 5, 10, 15, 20 different students of cutting through a book or a story of that nature and making sure the performance is nailed down. So I do still recommend, at least looking at the script lists, which I'll show you here right now. This is the high school list, and it does look a little weird because it is that straight up Excel document kind of thing. And what you have to watch for, though, is just the first column there is the name, the second column is the author, and then from there it goes through the other bibliography information. But what I would just do is just go through and say, hey, students, here's some DIs, what pops out? And if I do recognize anything, I would kind of mention it about what I thought it was about. Or, the same is true for scrolling, duo Interp scripts, and I do believe eventually we have some HI scripts. And so there are a whole bunch of different options, and I also have the middle school list as well available. And so I'm not going to put that up on the screen because it's the exact same, it's from middle school. And so I probably would start with the middle school list, though, just to show them some things. I know I saw Captain Underpants, for instance, for HI that I knew that many of them would recognize right away, and we would talk through it and maybe give some examples of how that would work and how that would look. But either way, this is just a simple, straightforward breakdown of that first week, the event overview and the script process. Once that got done, we would start looking at different scripts and trying to find scripts. I know right now, we're currently we just finished week 2 in my own personal walk through this entire structure. And so we do have a couple of students who have scripts. I think we ended up with like 2 duos and maybe 2 HIs or something of that nature. But we're still figuring out that script selection. I think we have that down. And then next week we're going to be starting over characterization and blocking and go through there. And I guess just as a plug for the NSDA's resources, they do have a Start Here series that does have a whole bunch of things that are helpful for brand new people. And so I would recommend that as well. But this is just how I'm going to start things off, and I'm hoping it's going to bear some fruit. And hopefully this is just an approach that you could take. And I know it seems kind of simple, just like watch some of the things and break them down. But especially as something that I feel is not as one of my stronger suits, I think that this is the best way I can approach this. And I'm more than open to any suggestions that any of you might have in order to make sure that I'm hitting the right marks for these students. And so hopefully that's helpful. And thank you for your time.